Okay, so thank you for joining us today for our workshop on healthier recipe exchange. My name is Courtney Handelin, and I am one of the health coaches here at the Waukesha Employee Health and Wellness Center. And I'm really excited to be sharing this with you today. I think it's going to be fun. Great one, like I said, for those of you joining us. Please feel free to use the chat box to interact. And if you're comfortable, you can come off of mute as well. This will be recorded, so just have that in mind that the recording might share your name. And the idea behind this was to be kind of like a cookie exchange, except in light of keeping things healthier, we decided to make it a healthier recipe exchange. So today on our agenda, we will be discussing ways that you can reduce sugar and unhealthy fats from your favorite recipes at any time of the year, but especially the holidays, as those recipes tend to come with a lot of sugar and fat. We will also be strategizing ways and methods for increasing the nutritional value of your recipes, and then share some fun recipe swap ideas. So we're going to start with sugar today. And the American Heart Association recommends limiting sugar 9 teaspoons a day for men, which is equivalent to 37 grams, and 6 teaspoons a day for women, which is equivalent to 25 grams. And if we look at how much sugar is in a typical holiday treat, you can see that a lot of times just by having one piece, which we know can be hard, you're already going at sometimes above and beyond what that recommended sugar intake should be for the day in just one sitting. So you can see below, one slice of apple pie gets you almost there, 17 grams of sugar, pumpkin, 22 grams, and those are like typical recipes. Eggnog, a common one that you buy at the store, 20 grams of sugar. Common hot cocoa mixes, 27 grams of sugar, and then the infamous pumpkin spice latte, hitting it big, 39 grams of sugar. So let's talk about some basic tips for reducing sugar. And these are just a couple substitutions that we use ourselves. And so if you have any more, please feel free to share in the chat box. But for some recipes, swapping out half of the sugar for making it brown sugar, making it coconut sugar, using other things like monk fruit sweetener. For example, the coconut sugar and monk fruit sweetener tend to have less of an impact on your glucose levels. Also, adding sweetness with things like pure maple syrup or honey or vanilla extract. So if you're cutting down on the amount of sugar total, using those things instead, especially the vanilla extract. And then using spices like cinnamon or nutmeg is another great way to bring a little sweetness without adding actual sugar. Same as using mashed bananas or applesauce, that can give you some sweetness without adding a lot of sugar. That's more of the natural sugar that's found in the fruit. And so actually, above all, most recipes you can cut the sugar up to 1/2 of what it calls for without risking the quality of the bake. I mean, of course, many of you probably know baking really is where it gets a little more complicated. It's more of a science. You can't necessarily as easily just make things up and make changes on the fly and still end up with the same quality product at the end. And so that's one thing that I wanted to make sure to share with you, that sugar is one of those things. While yes, you probably need some in there for what you're baking, depending on what you're making, but you likely don't need the full amount that the recipe calls for. So you can cut that up a lot of times to 1/2. And if you're not comfortable with that, I'd say try when you're making something, especially if it's something that you've made before, try doing a 1/4 cup less. And then next time maybe do, work your way towards that 1/2 cup less, getting a little closer each time. So if anyone has any ideas or things that they do that I didn't mention for reducing sugar in your recipes, please feel free to share that in the chat box and I can share it out with the audience. Or like I said, if you're comfortable, your voice being in the recording, you can also bring yourself off of mute as well. Is there anything that anyone wants to share? Type in the chat box for us.
For some of the recipes that you see that involve like a yogurt base, they actually now make a low sugar yogurt called Too Good. That is a great substitute because a lot of yogurt base are like 8 grams of sugar where it reduces it to 2 grams.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. That is a pretty decent brand of yogurt as well that's out there. And I think they have it's got a pretty good amount of protein in it as well. A lot of sugar that is found in yogurt is natural sugar, but if you're getting the plain. But when you get the sweetened, like a vanilla yogurt, that is going to have added extra sugar. And it's, you don't have as much control over how much is added to that. So it is a good thing to be watching. And someone shared in the chat box, thoughts on using dates. Yeah, that is a good one to use. Ground dates, they do bring a lot of sweetness, and I should have had that in there, but it would kind of go along the line of like bananas or apples. The dates, again, a fruit bringing its natural sweetness. And someone did ask for clarification on that yogurt. It is called Too Good. The brand is called Too Good, and I think it's like the number 2 and then good. So that's a good one to look for. I've seen it at most grocery stores. I don't know that I've seen it in the big tubs, but I'm sure it is out there if you look for it.
They only have the plain in the big tub.
In the big tub. Okay, perfect. Yeah, which is probably what you'd want to do for baking anyway, using the plain, and then you add your own sweetness.
Yeah, and it's spelled out TW.
Oh, it is spelled TW. Okay, thank you. TWO. Okay, awesome. Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone have any other comments on sugar or ways to reduce sugar when you're baking or cooking, or different alternatives for sweetening? We're getting some good action in the chat box as well, so I appreciate that. Okay, then moving on to talking about fat. So with dietary fat, not all fat is bad, actually. The unsaturated fat, so polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, those fats are actually really good for us. Our body does need them. And so if you want more information on that specifically, I encourage you to check out our latest podcast episode. It's all about dietary fats. But really the fats that you want to limit are the saturated fats. That's often found in meat and dairy products. And so that particular brand of yogurt, the Too Good, they do a pretty good job of reducing the amount of fat that is in there in a sensible way, I believe. And then the one that you really want to watch out for is the trans fats, and avoid at all costs if you can. And those are artificially created fats that are going to clog up our arteries. And they're found in foods that are highly processed. So your fried foods, your baked goods, and even things that I think people don't think about or consider it to be, but in a lot of frozen foods, especially your frozen pizzas, your frozen doughs, your frozen crusts, crackers, margarines, and dips and spreads as well. So, like I said, some fat is good, the right kind of fat, but there's also fat that you want to be aware of. And let's see, I have a couple things coming in the chat box here. So someone asked, things can say that they have 0 trans fat, but that isn't actually true. How do you know? So yeah, if it says 0 on the label, it still could have some. If it's less than half a gram, they don't have to put it in that number piece. So you have to look in the ingredients list and really looking for the like hydrogenated oils, partially hydrogenated. Those are going to be a tip for you that it's trans fats. So watching out for those in that ingredients list of packaged foods. And someone also had said thoughts on using real butter versus margarine. Margarine is artificially created. So I tend to recommend using the real butter if you're going to be doing stuff like that. There can be, some perks, I guess, to using those margarines. But overall, it's not it's not a real food, right? So I would avoid those as much as you can. And each person might have an individual reason for using that. And like I said, sometimes it's justified. Most of the time, using real butter is probably better for you. And better than that, when you can switch to, which you'll see in a second, switching to like an olive oil that has the good fats in it, and using that in place of butter where you can. And those are all good questions. Let me get us to our next slide here so we can talk about ways that we can increase the good fats and reduce the bad ones. So just some basic tips. Using Greek yogurt in place of mayonnaise or sour cream, or really any yogurt. Greek yogurt in particular brings a little bit of that sourness that especially you get in sour cream. But there are other brands of yogurt out there, and they're not all made the same. And even amongst like Greek yogurt is not, one Greek yogurt from one brand might be different from the other brand. So there's a resource out there that I highly recommend checking out if you haven't already. It's called fooducate.com. I'll type it in the chat box, but it's fooducate.com. They have a free app as well. And no, I'm not paid by them. I wish I was, because I'm pitching them all the time. But they have a barcode scanner, so you can scan packaged foods and you can see, you know, what's good about them, what's not so good about them, and that might be where it'll say like, ooh, there's trans fats in here or some harmful chemicals. And it'll also then tell you what are some healthier alternatives. So that can be good when if you're buying like a Greek yogurt to use in place of a sour cream and you're really trying to make the recipe healthier. You want to make sure the ingredient you're using instead is truly a healthier option. And that can help you make some of those decisions. Other ideas, using ricotta cheese or blended cottage cheese in place of cream cheese. Now, obviously, depending on what you're making, you might not want to do that one for one, but if you cut it in half, doing half and half. Same with the Greek yogurt. Sometimes if you're making like an egg salad, for example, maybe cutting out all the mayonnaise and using Greek yogurt, it's going to deliver kind of a different flavor. So using still some mayonnaise, but also not all the mayonnaise, using some Greek yogurt instead can help to increase the nutritional value, increase the protein, but you still have that flavor. So that's just one thing to remember when you're looking at all these, that you know, we really need to work away from that all or nothing thinking and just think about how can I improve this a little bit, if nothing else. So another thing if you're making like a big meal, I'm thinking like a ground meat for tacos or that kind of thing, making your meat go further, using lean meat obviously, but then adding like cooked lentils or beans, or even mushrooms into that ground meat, you know, finely chopped mushrooms, obviously, finely chopped onions, depending on what you're using it with. Those things kind of take on the flavor of what they're part of, similar to, and as well cauliflower would do that. And they make that what's available to be more, while also healthier. Subbing applesauce or mashed banana or prune puree for half the butter for half the butter or oil when you're baking, or like I said, substituting half of that butter that you need for oil when you're baking, and then playing up the foods that you know already have healthy fats and either adding them in or making them the star of the dish. So avocados, olive oil, chia seeds and flaxseed, any other nuts, you know, when you can add those two things, you're just increasing the nutritional value of that recipe. And then while also increasing the protein that's available there, which is another great perk. Does anyone else have tips for swapping out the unhealthy fats and adding more healthy fats? And obviously there's cooking methods you can do to reduce the amount of fat that's present. But if anyone wants to share their tips, I invite you to come off of mute and share if you want, or type it in the chat box. Okay, I thought there was maybe someone coming out. So moving on then, just some other tips to increase the nutritional value. Sneaking in vegetables wherever you can, or doubling what the recipe calls for. So example, if you are making a casserole that calls for, half a bag of mixed vegetables, or we'll say like 2 cups of mixed vegetables. If you have a 4-bag cup of frozen mixed vegetables, just use the whole thing. Another way to sneak in vegetables could be that, like I said, using beans or mushrooms, chopping those up finely or cooking those and adding them to like a ground meat sort of thing. Also, spinach is one that's really easy to hide in smoothies, but also in, surprisingly enough, waffles. So if you're making your own waffle mix, just chop that spinach up super fine and mix it in there. No one will be able to taste it as long as, or even tell, as long as the pieces are small enough. And I actually do that with my own kids. My daughter likes spinach, so that's not an issue, but she thinks it's fun and it gives it like some green color, like sprinkles. Using pureed starchy vegetables in place of like a cream of soup. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But depending on what kind of dish you're making with that, it's really easy to do. Subbing half of the needed flour for whole wheat flour obviously helps to bring in more of those whole grains. And then trying to use different whole grains for something that would regularly call for like pasta salad or a rice dish. So using things like barley or quinoa. Adding flavor with herbs and spices obviously helps to increase the nutritional value, but then also likely reducing your salt intake and making your own salad dressing. Super easy, 3 parts olive oil, 1 part vinegar or acid, and then any garlic or pepper, whatever kind of flavor you want it to have. And then another one that I like to share is using a more bold or sharp cheese to pack a bigger flavor punch, and then you don't need to use as much cheese to get that cheesy flavor. So those are just a few extra tips there for you. And then anyone else have some extra tips they want to share? Because otherwise next we're going to move on to just an example of what a recipe swap might look like.
One of the things that we've been doing at home is in place of rice or in addition to rice is mixing in like the cauliflowered rice or the sweet potato. Those are a great way to keep calorie count down but still have that consistency.
Yes, awesome. I love that. I love that you brought that up. And I also like that you said mixing it in. So some people might think like, oh, I can't get my spouse to eat all cauliflower rice in place of rice. And that's okay. And sometimes cauliflower has no place in the dish. But if you do like the half and half, it can be there and, make the dish go farther, but also increasing the nutritional value without taking away from the original intent. Same thing for like pasta. If you do half regular and half whole wheat, that can, sometimes satisfy both parties, or get you to transition to like the whole wheat pasta. And you can do the same with rice, and you can do the same with yogurt, to be honest.
There's veggie pasta too. I don't know if people are aware of that, but it's pretty decent. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. There's quite a few. You're right. Veggie pastas out there where they make it with like a puree from certain vegetables. Lentil pastas out there, chickpea pasta. I know I've seen like a cauliflower pasta. So there's a lot of healthier options out there in the store if we just take a little time to look. And we can include those when we're making our recipes as well. Okay, and nothing coming in from the chat, so we will move on. I know I don't want you to be late for your next agenda, so keep us on time here. So going over a recipe swap. So someone had submitted a cheesy potato recipe, and that is one that we're going to feature today. So I have on the left-hand column has what the original ingredients called for, and then the right-hand column, some healthier options. And one thing that I do want to say with this, and a couple of people had mentioned this in their emails of submitting their recipes, and I thought it was fantastic, and I'm really glad to hear that this is happening, when you look at a recipe, if you don't have all the ingredients, it doesn't mean you can't make it. Sometimes with baking, that might be a little harder. You have to be a little more particular about what you sub in to get the end result. But with cooking, you really have a lot more freedom to create it and make it your own. So if you're looking at this and you want to make this recipe, but you don't have frozen hash browns, or frozen, the hash browns ready from potatoes, but you do have a bag of potatoes, well, you can always shred those potatoes. And if you wanted to be safe, you could freeze them then overnight or for a few hours to get a similar effect. But in the recipe itself, it does say to unthaw them a little bit. So I think it would be fine to use fresh potatoes as well, if that's what you have. Here you can see that we recommended using a Boulder cheese, Swiss cheese in particular. I calculated it with, I'll show you like the calorie food label or the nutrition facts comparison of the two in a little bit. But I calculated with Swiss cheese and used 6 ounces. Just from personal experience, I know that when you do have that stronger cheese, you don't need to use as much. Plain Greek yogurt, like I said, instead of sour cream. Also, same thing here. If you don't have sour cream, or maybe you just have a little and you have some Greek yogurt, but it doesn't all add up to 16 ounces exactly, it's probably fine. Just go with it. And it'll still taste delicious. So you can always make up for flavors or the texture that you need with other things you have on hand, most likely. Most of us have a well enough stocked kitchen and pantry that we can make things work and adapt on the fly if we are just willing to be flexible and just go with it and experiment with things and kind of create out of what we have. Let's see, the other thing you can see in here, the recipe called for 1 cup of chopped onions, and this is a great place where do the onion. If you have 2, or if a whole onion, you have a big onion and that's more than 1 cup, who cares? Throw it all in. Or same thing, using the cauliflower in here, or mushrooms if you have them, or peas, or whatever you have on hand that needs to be used up, can easily be thrown in here. When you have cheese, it's hard to go wrong. When you have the milk and the butter, potatoes, that kind of thing, and any other vegetable in there is going to be delicious. And the one thing that I think is really cool from this recipe is the can of creamed soup. We all know what this is, I'm sure. They look pretty disgusting when you glop it out of the can. It's very gelatinous. And you can actually make your own cream of soup. You could also instead just use like Greek yogurt in its place. So add more Greek yogurt to this recipe, and then increase, you probably want to increase the seasoning a little bit, especially the garlic. You could also use pureed vegetables in here in place of that. So that might be your mushrooms, and you might need to add a little milk in between in it, or cauliflower, or whatever it might be. You could do that instead of the cream of chicken soup. But I do believe that I added that to your recipe link in the email I sent out, this recipe for making your own cream of chicken soup, and it's enough to make just like the 1 can worth. And it is pretty simple. It's just, I think it's basically like flour, some milk, a little salt and pepper. That's about it. So it's easy to make that on your own. And then garlic salt. So switching and using something like garlic powder is just going to help to reduce the sodium, and then you can add the salt as needed. And then someone had said, are you able to freeze and store? I believe this recipe, definitely you could make a double batch and you could freeze it. I guess I've never tried that myself, so with a recipe like this, so I don't know if you could, how the texture would change, but actually maybe that question meant to the cream of chicken soup. Could you freeze it and store it? I don't know. I think it would probably be okay. You might just have to mix it real good after it unthaws to get that texture and the consistency back, because likely things will separate a little bit. But that's a great question. If nothing else, I'm sure it would be an easy thing to make, a day or 2 ahead of time, and then just give it a quick stir the day of again to freshen it up. So good question there. And quickly, I'll show you here. I just went to a verywell.com, I think it is called, for this recipe analyzer. And if you just type in recipe calculator at Google, it'll give you a bunch of links. And Verywell is often one of the first ones. So if you can see here, just the nutrition facts labels. And not that it was a ton, but saved 37 calories. Again, this was with using the Greek yogurt, with using garlic powder instead of garlic salt, using, what else was it? I cut the butter in half and used half olive oil to increase the healthy fat, and half of it was the melted butter still. And then also 6 ounces of Swiss cheese, and then added some vegetables into the recipe. So we saved 37 calories, saved 5 grams of saturated fat, which is great. That's the bad fat. And it doesn't say it on here, but I'm certain we would have increased the good fat. 207 milligrams of sodium, which is a lot to save just by, that was pretty much probably mostly from cutting out switching from garlic salt to garlic powder. So keep that in mind. And then also save 2 grams of sugar and increase the protein and vitamin D. So I think it's worth it to make it a little bit healthier. There's other nutrients in there as well that are included when we add more of those vegetables, of course, in there. So lots of benefits. And I see a question coming in the chat box, so I'll just hang on for 2 seconds here. Okay, and then someone had said in the chat box how to make healthy a little bit more your coffee or caffeine in the morning. And someone else had said, where did the sugar savings come? So let's hold on to the coffee thing. The sugar saving came from with the switching the yogurt, for one, was one of them, and then the other thing I think probably was from that cream of chicken soup. Things that you wouldn't expect to have sugar do have sugar. Okay. So then, yes, the coffee. I'm assuming you're relating it to if you have like creamer in your coffee in the morning, or you're running through Starbucks. So using a lower fat milk can help. Also, probably better than that is if you're using like a nut milk, like the coconut, unsweetened coconut milk, soy milk. Those, if they're unsweetened, tend to have less sugar. So again, you have to really watch that label and the ingredients list, because they're not all made the same. If you're going to like a Starbucks, just asking for half a pump of the sugar, half the pumps of sugar as opposed to their normal pumps of that flavoring. If anyone else has tips on making their morning coffee or caffeine a little healthier, please feel free to throw it in the chat box or come off of mute. But we will move on to the ingredient swap for brownies. So with brownies, someone had submitted a healthier recipe of brownies that uses zucchini in it, and that a lot of times it reduces the oil and reduces the need for eggs. And there's also recipes out there that will call for like avocados instead, and another way to reduce the oil, and you don't need the eggs. Not that eggs are bad. I don't want you to get that impression. And so I'm comparing that to just a typical like classic brownie recipe. And you can see here that we're cutting out, some of instead of all that butter, some of the butter and some of it's olive oil. So we're getting some of the good fats in there, using half of the flour amount to do whole wheat flour. So we're getting the whole grains, using cocoa powder, upping the amount of the cocoa powder because it's unsweetened. And then we can cut out the need for the hard semi-sweet chocolate. And then reducing the sugar. Like I said, you can cut it in half if you're not comfortable with that. Instead of doing 2 cups of sugar, doing 1.5 cups, etc. And you could add a little bit of vanilla extract to sweeten that without being actual sugar added to it. And then some other ways to increase the healthfulness of brownies or other baked goods. Like I said before, adding like some chopped walnuts or chia seed, etc. Things they'll help increase the healthy fats and extra protein. And so you can see here again, just by those simple switches, you're really saving quite a bit. So 112 calories, 8 grams of saturated fat. Again, that's a bad fat. 90 grams of cholesterol, 12.5 carbs, and nearly 10 grams of sugar. We also doubled the fiber, plus zucchini has a lot of benefits, so we're adding all of those, health benefits from using the vegetable in it. And then just to circle back to the question in the chat box that was about the coffee, a couple other people had said, putting like a little vanilla extract in your coffee might give it a little flavor. That's a good idea. Also someone said they put like pure maple syrup in the coffee. And that can be good as well. If you are one that likes lattes, if you just take a little bit of your milk, pour a dab of the pure maple syrup in there, maybe some cinnamon, and whisk that up before you add it to your coffee. That can give you some of that latte flavor without the high sugar content. I'm sure many of you who like pumpkin spice lattes have seen the like copycat recipes that are healthier, but just takes a little bit of that pumpkin puree and mix it up with those other ingredients and then add it to your coffee. And it can be quite delicious. So cinnamon is the other thing I would say, like cinnamon, nutmeg, cardamom. Those are spices that you probably have in your spice cabinet or spice drawer, and they can sweeten anything, including coffee, without adding sugar. So thank you all for participating. If anyone else has any other comments to share, please type in the chat box or feel free to come off of mute. We do have some other opportunities I wanted to make sure you're aware of, including our 30-day gratitude challenge this month. We are doing Merry Mindfulness, like a holiday relaxation series this month and next month, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. And then we also have, as I mentioned before, Talk About Wellness podcast. New episodes released the first Tuesday of each month. And this month we are actually having a bonus episode we will be releasing. So be sure to keep your eyes out for that. And like I said, the one that released actually just 2 days ago on Tuesday was about dietary fats. So that might tie in and give you some extra ideas in from here. And someone said, where do I find the gratitude challenge? We'll make sure to send out those links with the recording and the slides of this presentation for you. So I'll make sure that you get that. That being said, thank you for joining us. And when you're ready to have the best Thursday afternoon since last Thursday, you can feel free to hop off. Anyone who does want to share some final comments or thoughts or suggestions in the chat box, please feel free, or you can come off of mute as well and share. Thank you for joining us.